You know what I honestly believe? I don't think the VA really cares if your CPAP is running every night or collecting dust on your nightstand, because pretty soon it's not going to matter at all. And that's hard to hear, especially if you've been doing everything right up to this point. You went through the sleep study, you got the diagnosis, you fought for that CPAP machine, and you've been using it faithfully every night because it's finally helping you sleep or at least breathe at a minimum for the first time in years. But here's the hard truth: you could be following every single instruction, using your machine religiously, and still lose your 50% VA rating when these new rules kick in. Not because your condition got better, but because the VA decided to change the way they measure what disability looks like for this claim. And that's exactly what's coming up from the end by the end of 2025, potentially. For a lot of veterans, it's going to mean waking up one morning and realizing the system just moved the goalpost again. For years, veterans have lived by one simple rule when it came to sleep apnea and the VA. If you had a diagnosis and your doctor prescribed a CPAP, that was your ticket to 50% disability rating. It didn't matter if you were in the Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine. The formula was always the same. Sleep studies show sleep apnea. Doesn't matter if it's mild, moderate, or severe. You get prescribed a CPAP. You get service connected for sleep apnea, and the VA grants 50%. It was predictable. It was consistent. And for a lot of veterans, it was life-changing, because that rating often meant the difference between scraping by and finally being able to breathe a little easier, literally and financially. That rule comes from the CFR 38, Diagnostic Code 6847. It's been the foundation of how sleep apnea has been rated for years. It wasn't perfect, but at least it was clear. Veterans knew what was expected. They knew how to prove their case. But now that's all changing. The VA is rewriting the playbook before our eyes. And this time they're moving the goalpost, shifting away from the simple question of, do you use a CPAP, to a much more complicated one: does your treatment actually work, and how severely does your condition still impact your life? And in other words, the focus is no longer on whether you've been prescribed a machine, it's on whether that machine helps you enough to disqualify you from the rating you've already earned. Here's what's really at stake, and it's bigger than most veterans actually realize. If these changes go into effect by the end of 2025, like they're predicting, that automatic 50% rating so many veterans have relied on for years will vanish overnight. Under the new rules, simply using the CPAP machine, even if you use it every single night, even if your sleep study proves you stop breathing a dozen times an hour, it won't be enough anymore. The VA will now judge your case based on whether your treatment actually works. If your CPAP is considered effective, meaning it keeps your oxygen level stable and reduces your apnea events, you could drop from 50% to 10% or even 0%, because the VA will argue that your disability is controlled. Think about what that means in real life. That's hundreds, in some cases over $1,000 a month gone from your compensation. That could mean losing your dependents' benefits, losing your eligibility for certain healthcare programs, and even losing access to secondary conditions that you've built your claim around. And here's the kicker: the VA isn't taking anything away maliciously. They're just changing how they define disabled. But for veterans living on fixed incomes with families, mortgages, or medical bills, that bureaucratic redefinition can feel like getting blindsided. But what's the good news? If you act now before these rules change and get finalized, you'll be grandfathered in under the current system. That means you have a CPAP machine, your 50% rating will stay locked in, protected for life. You'll never have to fight this battle again, no matter how many more times the VA moves the goalpost to the future. A few months ago, a Navy veteran reached out to me. Let's call him Mike. Mike had been diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea about 2 years ago. He used his CPAP religiously every single night because his wife told him flat out, "You stop breathing in your sleep. I lie awake just listening to you make sure you start again. You sound like a broken dishwasher disposal." He did everything right. He got the sleep study, prescription was filled, compliance data was perfect. He even kept a sleep log showing how often he used his CPAP. When it came to filing his claim, Mike hesitated. He told me, "I'll wait until next year. The VA's backed up anyways. I don't want to deal with it right now." And I get it, because that's how most veterans think. We've all been through that bureaucratic nightmare. You tell yourself you'll do it later until later turns into too late. And I told him, "Mike, listen, these rules change. The rule changes are coming, and they're coming fast. Once they hit, the old 50% automatic rating for CPAP use won't exist anymore. You could lose thousands of dollars a year just by waiting, man." So we filed this claim right then and there. Within a few months, he got his 50% rating approved. That rating stabilized his finances, covered his dependents, and gave him peace of mind knowing that part of his service record was finally acknowledged. But here's the reality. If Mike had waited even 6 more months, he had the same diagnosis, same CPAP, same sleep study, his outcome could have been radically different. Under the new VA system, I would have looked at him and said, your treatment works, you're stable, you're not disabled enough. And that's what breaks my heart, because the difference between winning and losing under these new rules isn't about effort or evidence. It's about timing. Mike did everything right, but if he had filed just a few months later, he could have lost everything. That's how critical this window is right now. That's why every veteran watching this right now needs to act before the VA moves the goalpost again. First, you've got to understand the difference between how the VA rates sleep apnea right now and what's coming. Because this isn't just some small policy tweak. It's a complete shift in how the VA defines what counts as disabling. Right now, the system is pretty straightforward. It's been that way for years. 50% means you've got a confirmed diagnosis and you're prescribed a CPAP or a similar breathing device like a mouthpiece. 100% rating means you're dealing with chronic respiratory failure, carbon dioxide retention, you've got enlargement in your heart, or you have a tracheostomy, breathing tube in your neck. 30% means you have persistent daytime sleepiness, or what they call hypersomnolence. And a 0% rating means that you're asymptomatic, but have documented sleep disorder breathing. That's it. 4 simple levels. Veterans could look at the chart and know exactly where they stood. But now under this new system, the clarity disappears. The VA is moving away from that one question, do you use a CPAP, to 3 much tougher ones. 1, how effective is your treatment? The VA will now use your follow-up sleep study to see if your CPAP actually works. If your oxygen levels are stable and your apnea events drop to normal levels, they'll argue your condition is controlled, which means you could drop 10% or even to 0%. 2, are there comorbidities preventing you from using your CPAP? So conditions like PTSD, chronic sinusitis, or GERD can make it physically or psychologically impossible to tolerate the mask. Under the new system, this matters, because if you can't use treatment due to a comorbidity, that's when you can still qualify for 50% or higher. 3, has your sleep apnea caused any end organ damage? We're talking heart, lung, brain involvement, things like hypertension, heart failure, pulmonary hypertension. If your condition is advanced that far, that's when the VA starts to look at 50%, sometimes 100%. And here's the part most veterans miss. These rules will apply to all new claims once the regulation takes effect. That means if you wait until 2025 to file, your claim will be judged under the new stricter system. So you've got to go do this right now. If you've been diagnosed with sleep apnea, even if you haven't filed yet, get your claim submitted immediately. Filing now locks you into the current, more favorable criteria. You'll be grandfathered in and protected for life, no matter how much the rules change later. Do not wait for the VA to make it harder. Protect what you've earned while you still can. The second thing you need to understand, and this one is pretty huge, is how comorbid conditions can completely change your VA rating outcome. Now, I know that term sounds clinical, it's long, hard to understand, but here's what it really means in plain English. A comorbidity is a medical condition that exists alongside your sleep apnea, and it makes it worse, harder to treat, or impossible to manage effectively. These are things like your PTSD, rhinitis, GERD, asthma, diabetes, obesity, and even chronic pain, all of which are incredibly common among veterans. And under the new VA rules, these conditions are no longer side notes in your file. They are front and center because comorbidities are now one of the deciding factors that determine whether you get a 0%, 10%, or even 100% rating. Let me break it down so it's a little easier. So, for example, let's start with PTSD and anxiety disorder, mental health, right? For a lot of veterans, putting on a CPAP mask can feel like putting a bag over your head. It's tight, it's restrictive, and when you're half asleep, it can trigger panic, claustrophobia, or even flashbacks. I've heard veterans tell me they wake up gasping, ripping the mask off because it reminds them of being restrained or trapped. That's not non-compliance, that's trauma response. And if your PTSD makes it impossible for you to tolerate the mask, the VA needs to recognize that. Under the new system, that can justify you for a 50% rating depending on your severity. Next, let's say rhinitis and sinusitis. You can't breathe through a mask if your nose is swollen shut for chronic inflammation. veterans with service-connected rhinitis or sinusitis often struggle with nasal obstruction, chronic postnasal drip, and congestion, all of which makes CPAP therapy pretty ineffective. When that happens, your sleep apnea remains untreated, which directly meets the new criteria for a higher rating. Now, let's talk about GERD, or gastroesophageal reflux disease, heartburn. This one surprises a lot of veterans. GERD can cause discomfort and regurgitation when lying down, which can literally interfere with wearing a CPAP mask. Air can get trapped in the stomach, causing bloating or acid reflux that makes it impossible to sleep in the right position or maintain mask seal. So if you've ever been diagnosed with GERD and it's impacting your ability to sleep or your ability to wear your CPAP, it's more than just a side effect. It's a documented reason your treatment isn't fully effective. Other big ones include asthma, obesity, and chronic pain. Asthma inflames your airways, increasing resistance, reducing the effectiveness of airflow, even with CPAP. Obesity, which often results from chronic pain and limited mobility, can worsen sleep apnea through airway compression. And chronic pain, whether it's from back injuries, arthritis, or even fibromyalgia, can make it impossible to sleep in positions that allow for proper mask fit. So here's the bottom line. If you have any of these comorbid conditions, mental health, respiratory, metabolic, or musculoskeletal, they can be the key to preserving or even increasing your rating under the new system. The VA wants evidence that your treatment is either ineffective or impossible to use because of a verified medical condition. And if you can document that, you're not just telling your story, you're meeting their new criteria. So here's a pro tip. Talk to your doctor about every single condition that affects your sleep or ability to use your CPAP right now. Make sure it's documented in your records and get a medical nexus from your provider that connects these comorbidities to your sleep apnea. That documentation really could be the difference between a denial and a protected 50% rating. Number 3, a medical nexus letter. And this is the linchpin for this case sometimes. This is where everything comes together. A well-written nexus letter explains why your sleep apnea is at least as likely as not related to your service or secondary to another service-connected condition like PTSD, rhinitis, or chronic pain. A strong nexus letter does 3 things. It connects the dots between your diagnosis and your service. It uses the VA's own terminology, at least as likely as not, so the rater has no wiggle room, and it cites medical research and peer-reviewed studies that support your case. For example, studies show a direct correlation between PTSD and disrupted sleep cycles leading to sleep apnea. Others show chronic pain leading to obesity, which then exacerbates airway obstruction. When your nexus ties that science to your personal history, you've created something the VA can't easily dismiss anymore. And this part is important. The nexus doesn't have to come from your own doctor or VA doctor. In fact, most VA doctors won't write them. It can come from any licensed medical provider who reviews your records, understands your condition, and can medically justify that link in writing. Here's the truth. Sleep apnea claims aren't about emotion. They're about documentation. You can tell your story all day long, but unless it's supported by medical evidence, the VA will say there's no nexus. So get your sleep study, your CPAP records, your nexus letter together now, because when those changes in 2025 hit, it won't just be about whether you have sleep apnea, it'll be about how well you can prove it on paper. So if you're watching this and you haven't filed your sleep apnea claim yet, don't wait anymore. I can't stress this enough. Once the VA finalizes these new rules, it's going to be significantly harder to qualify for anything above 10%. That means the same diagnosis, the same CPAP machine, and the same symptoms that would have earned you 50% today might barely get you recognized tomorrow. The VA is moving, again, these goalposts, again. And when they do, thousands of veterans are going to get caught flat-footed. You don't want to be one of them. So here's the truth. The veterans who win these cases aren't always the ones with the worst conditions. They're the ones with the best evidence. And that's exactly what we do every single day. At Xterra Health, our team of veteran providers and medical experts have helped countless thousands of veterans get service connected for their sleep apnea claims, even after being denied multiple times. We write nexus letters that don't just check boxes. They speak the VA's own language, connect the dots medically and legally, and back it all with peer-reviewed research. Our results speak for themselves. Over 96% of our nexus letters for sleep apnea lead to approval in the first submission. And for the few that require a higher level review, that number jumps to 97%. That's not luck, that's precision, that's experience, and that's what happens when veterans help veterans. So if you've been putting this off, stop scrolling, Take action today. File your intent to claim right now. It freezes your effective date and protects you under the current, more favorable rating system. Then click the link in the description below to schedule your free medical record review with us. We'll go through your records line by line and tell you exactly how your claim stacks up before the rule change hits. This isn't about fear. It's about being prepared. Because once the new regulations go into effect, the window will close and your opportunity to secure your rightful benefits goes with it. So take control while you still can. Protect your rating, protect your benefits, protect your family. So before you click off, listen. If this video helps you understand what's coming with the sleep apnea rule, with the rules changes, you need to be ready for what's next, because the VA isn't done shifting the landscape yet. In my next video, I'm breaking down the 2026 COLA increase, what it really means for your monthly compensation, how it's calculated, and what kind of raise you can actually expect to see hit your bank account. We'll talk about why these annual adjustments matter more than most veterans realize, how inflation impacts your rating in real terms, and what you can do right now to make sure your benefits stretch farther as the cost of living keeps climbing. So if you want to stay one step ahead of the system, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't miss it. Every week, I'm breaking down the changes that affect veterans the most, from policy updates to claim strategies, and showing you how to navigate them like a pro. Because knowledge is your leverage, and leverage is how we win. So until next time, stay mission ready.